The Cop and the Anthem by O.Henry. On his bench in Madison Square, Soapy moved uneasily. When wild geese honk high of nights, and when women without sealskin coats grow kind to their husbands, and when Soapy moves uneasily on his bench in the park, you may know that winter is near at hand. A dead leaf fell in Soapy's lap. That was Jack Frost's card. Jack is kind to the regular denizens of Madison Square and gives fair warning of his annual call. At the corners of 4 streets, he hands his pasteboard to the north wind, footman of the mansion of all outdoors, so that the inhabitants thereof may make ready. Soapy's mind became cognizant of the fact that the time had come for him to resolve himself into a singular committee of ways and means to provide against the coming rigor, and therefore he moved uneasily on his bench. The hibernatorial ambitions of Soapy were not of the highest. In them there were no considerations of Mediterranean cruises, of soporific southern skies drifting in the Vesuvian Bay. 3 months on the island was what his soul craved. 3 months of assured board and bed and congenial company, safe from Boreas and bluecoats, seemed to Soapy the essence of things desirable. For years the hospitable Blackwells had been his winter quarters, just as his more fortunate fellow New Yorkers had bought their tickets to Palm Beach and the Riviera each winter. So Soapy had made his humble arrangements for his annual hegira to the island. And now the time was come. On the previous night, 3 Sabbath newspapers, distributed beneath his coat, about his ankles, and over his lap, had failed to repulse the cold as he slept on his bench near the spurting fountain in the ancient square. So the island loomed big and timely in Soapy's mind. He scorned the provisions made in the name of charity for the city's dependents. In Soapy's opinion, the law was more benign than philanthropy. There was an endless round of institutions, municipal and eleemosynary, on which he might set out and receive lodging and food accordant with the simple life. But to one of Soapy's proud spirit, the gifts of charity are encumbered. If not in coin, you must pay in humiliation of spirit for every benefit received at the hands of philanthropy. As Caesar had his Brutus, every bed of charity must have its toll of a bath, every loaf of bread its compensation of a private and personal inquisition. Wherefore it is better to be a guest of the law, which, though conducted by rules, does not meddle unduly with a gentleman's private affairs. Soapy, having decided to go to the island, at once set about accomplishing his desire. There were many easy ways of doing this. The pleasantest was to dine luxuriously at some expensive restaurant, and then, after declaring insolvency, be handed over quietly and without uproar to a policeman. An accommodating magistrate would do the rest. Soapy left his bench and strolled out of the square and across the level sea of asphalt where Broad and Fifth Avenue flow together. Up Broadway he turned and halted at a glittering cafe, where are gathered together nightly the choicest products of the grape, the silkworm, and the protoplasm. Soapy had confidence in himself from the lowest button of his vest upward. He was shaven, and his coat was decent, and his neat black, ready-tied 4-in-hand had been presented to him by a lady missionary on Thanksgiving Day. If he could reach a table in the restaurant unsuspected, success would be his. The portion of him that would show above the table would raise no doubt in the waiter's mind. A roasted mallard duck, thought Soapy, would be about the thing, with a bottle of Chablis, and then camembert, a demitasse, and a cigar. $1 for the cigar would be enough. The total would not be so high as to call forth any supreme manifestation of revenge from the cafe management, and yet the meat would leave him filled and happy for the journey to his winter refuge. But as Soapy set foot inside the restaurant door, the head waiter's eye fell upon his frayed trousers and decadent shoes. Strong and ready hands turned him about and conveyed him in silence and haste to the sidewalk and averted the ignoble fate of the menaced mallard. Soapy turned off Broadway. It seemed that his route to the coveted island was not to be an Epicurean one. Some other way of entering limbo must be thought of. At a corner of 6th Avenue, electric lights and cunningly displayed wares behind plate glass made a shop window conspicuous. Soapy took a cobblestone and dashed it through the glass. People came running around the corner, a policeman in the lead. Soapy stood still, with his hands in his pockets, and smiled at the sight of brass buttons. "Where's the man that done that?" inquired the officer excitedly. "Don't you figure out that I might have had something to do with it?" said Soapy, not without sarcasm, but friendly, as one greets good fortune. The policeman's mind refused to accept Soapy even as a clue. Men who smash windows do not remain to parley with the law's minions. They take to their heels. The policeman saw a man halfway down the block running to catch a car. With drawn club, he joined in the pursuit. Soapy, with disgust in his heart, loafed along, twice unsuccessful. On the opposite side of the street was a restaurant of no great pretensions. It catered to large appetites and modest purses. Its crockery and atmosphere were thick, its soup and napery thin. Into this place Soapy took his accuse of shoes and telltale trousers without challenge. At a table he sat and consumed beefsteak, flapjacks, doughnuts, and pie. And then to the waiter be betrayed the fact that the minutest coin and himself were strangers. "Now get busy and call a cop," said Soapy, "and don't keep a gentleman waiting." "No cop for yous," said the waiter, with a voice like butter cakes and an eye like the cherry in a Manhattan cocktail. "Hey, Con." Neatly upon his left ear, on the callous pavement, two waiters pinched Soapy. He arose, joint by joint, as a carpenter's rule opens, and beat the dust from his clothes. Arrest seemed but a rosy dream. The island seemed very far away. A policeman who stood before a drugstore 2 doors away laughed and walked down the street. 5 blocks Soapy traveled before his courage permitted him to woo capture again. This time the opportunity presented what he fatuously termed to himself a cinch. A young woman of a modest and pleasing guise was standing before a show window, gazing with sprightly interest at its display of shaving mugs and inkstands, and 2 yards from the window a large policeman of severe demeanor leaned against a water plug. It was Soapy's design to assume the role of the despicable and execrated masher. The refined and elegant appearance of his victim and the contiguity of the conscientious cop encouraged him to believe that he would soon feel the pleasant official clutch upon his arm that would ensure his winter quarters on the tight little aisle. Soapy straightened the lady missionary's ready-made tie, dragged his shrinking cuffs into the open, set his hat at a killing cant, and sidled toward the young woman. He made eyes at her, was taken with sudden coughs and hms, smiled, smirked, and went brazenly through the impudent and contemptible litany of the masher. With half an eye, Soapy saw that the policeman was watching him fixedly. The young woman moved away a few steps, and again bestowed her absorbed attention upon the shaving mugs. Soapy followed, boldly stepping to her side, raised his hat, and said, "Ah, there, Bedelia. Don't you want to come and play in my yard?" The policeman was still looking. The persecuted young woman had but to beckon a finger, and Soapy would be practically en route for his insular haven. Already he imagined he could feel the cozy warmth of the station house. The young woman faced him, and stretching out a hand, caught Soapy's coat sleeve. "Sure, Mike," she said joyfully. "If you'll blow me to a pail of suds, I'd have spoke to you sooner, but the cop was watching." With the young woman playing the clinging ivy to his oak, Soapy walked past the policeman, overcome with gloom. He seemed doomed to liberty. At the next corner he shook off his companion and ran. He halted in the district where by night are found the lightest streets, hearts, vows, and librettos. Women in furs and men in greatcoats moved gaily in the wintry air. A sudden fear seized Soapy that some dreadful enchantment had rendered him immune to arrest. The thought brought a little panic upon it, and when he came upon another policeman lounging grandly in front of a transplendent theater, he caught at the immediate straw of disorderly conduct. On the sidewalk, Soapy began to yell drunken gibberish at the top of his harsh voice. He danced, howled, raved, and otherwise disturbed the welkin. The policeman twirled his club, turned his back to Soapy, and remarked to a citizen, "'Tis one of them Yale lads celebrating a goose egg they give to the Hartford College. Noisy, but no harm. We've instructions to leave 'em be." Disconsolate, Soapy ceased his unavailing racket. Would never a policeman lay hands on him? In his fancy, the island seemed an unattainable Arcadia. He buttoned his thin coat against the chilling wind. In a cigar store, he saw a well-dressed man lighting a cigar at a swinging light. His silk umbrella he had set by the door on entering. Soapy stepped inside, secured the umbrella, and sauntered off with it slowly. The man at the cigar light followed hastily. "My umbrella," he said sternly. "Oh, is it?" sneered Soapy, adding insult to petty larceny. "Well, why don't you call a policeman? I took it, your umbrella. Why don't you call a cop? There stands one on the corner." The umbrella owner slowed his steps. Soapy did likewise, with a presentiment that luck would again run against him. The policeman looked at the two curiously. "Of course," said the umbrella man. "That is, well, you know how these mistakes occur. If it's your umbrella, I hope you'll excuse me. I picked it up this morning in a restaurant. If you recognize it as yours, why, I hope you'll—" "Of course it's mine," said Soapy viciously. The ex-umbrella man retreated. The policeman hurried to assist a tall blonde in an opera cloak across the street in front of a streetcar that was approaching 2 blocks away. Soapy walked eastward through a street damaged by improvements. He hurled the umbrella wrathfully into an excavation. He muttered against the men who wear helmets and carry clubs. Because he wanted to fall into their clutches, they seemed to regard him as a king who could do no wrong. At length, Soapy reached one of the avenues to the east where the glitter and turmoil was but faint. He set his face down this toward Madison Square, for the homing instinct survives even when the home is a park bench. But on an unusually quiet corner, Soapy came to a standstill. Here was an old church, quaint and rambling and gabled. Through one violet-stained window a soft light glowed, where, no doubt, the organist loitered over the keys, making sure of his mastery of the coming Sabbath anthem. For there drifted out to Soapy's ears sweet music that caught and held him transfixed against the convolutions of the iron fence. The moon was above, lustrous and serene. Vehicles and pedestrians were few. Sparrows twittered sleepily in the eaves. For a little while the scene might have been a country churchyard, and the anthem that the organist played cemented Soapy to the iron fence, for he had known it well in the days when his life contained such things as mothers and roses and ambitions and friends and immaculate thoughts and collars. The conjunction of Soapy's receptive state of mind and the influences about the old church wrought a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. He viewed with swift horror the pit into which he had tumbled, the degraded days, unworthy desires, dead hopes, wrecked faculties, and base motives that made up his existence. And also, in a moment, his heart responded thrillingly to this novel mood. An instantaneous and strong impulse moved him to battle with his desperate fate. He would pull himself out of the mire. He would make a man of himself again. He would conquer the evil that had taken possession of him. There was time. He was comparatively young yet. He would resurrect his old eager ambitions and pursue them without faltering. Those solemn but sweet organ notes had set up a revolution in him. Tomorrow he would go into the roaring downtown district and find work. A fur importer had once offered him a place as driver. He would find him tomorrow and ask for the position. He would be somebody in the world. Soapy felt a hand laid on his arm. He looked quickly around into the broad face of a policeman. "What are you doing here?" asked the officer. "Nothing," said Soapy. "Then come along," said the policeman. 3 months on the island," said the magistrate in the police court the next morning. The Ransom of Red Chief by O.Henry. It looked like a good thing, but wait till I tell you. We were down south in Alabama, Bill Driscoll and myself, when this kidnapping idea struck us. It was, as Bill afterward expressed it, during a moment of temporary mental apparition. But we didn't find that out till later. There was a town down there as flat as a flannel cake and called Summit, of course. It contained inhabitants of as undeleterious and self-satisfied a class of peasantry as ever clustered around a maypole. Bill and me had a joint capital of about $600, and we needed just $2,000 more to pull off a fraudulent town lot scheme in western Illinois with. We talked it over on the front steps of the hotel. Philoprogenitiveness, says we, is strong in semi-rural communities. Therefore, and for other reasons, a kidnapping project ought to do better there than in the radius of newspapers that send reporters out in plain clothes to stir up talk about such things. We knew that Summit couldn't get after us with anything stronger than constables and maybe some lackadaisical bloodhounds and a diatribe or two in the weekly farmer's budget, so it looked good. We selected for our victim the only child of a prominent citizen named Ebenezer Dorset. The father was respectable and tight, a mortgage fancier and a stern, upright collection plate passer and forecloser. The kid was a boy of 10, with bas-relief freckles and hair the color of the cover of the magazine you buy at the newsstand when you want to catch a train. Bill and me figured that Ebenezer would melt down for a ransom of $2,000 to a cent. But wait till I tell you. About 2 miles from Summit was a little mountain covered with a dense cedar brake. On the rear elevation of this mountain was a cave. There we stored provisions. One evening after sundown, we drove in a buggy past old Dorset's house. The kid was in the street, throwing rocks at a kitten on the opposite fence. "Hey, little boy," says Bill, "would you like to have a bag of candy and a nice ride?" The boy catches Bill neatly in the eye with a piece of brick. "That'll cost old man an extra $500, says Bill, climbing over the wheel. That boy put up a fight like a welterweight cinnamon bear, but at last we got him down in the bottom of the buggy and drove away. We took him up to the cave, and I hitched the horse in the cedar brake. After dark, I drove the buggy to the little village 3 miles away where we had hired it and walked back to the mountain. Bill was pasting court plaster over the scratches and bruises on his features. There was a fire burning behind the big rock at the entrance of the cave, and the boy was watching a pot of boiling coffee, with 2 buzzard tail feathers stuck in his red hair. He points a stick at me when I come up and says, "Ha! Cursed paleface! Do you dare to enter the camp of Red Chief, the terror of the plains?" "He's all right now," says Bill, rolling up his trousers and examining some bruises on his shins. "We're playing Indian. We're making Buffalo Bill's show look like magic lantern views of Palestine in the town hall. I'm old Hank, the trapper, Red Chief's captive, and I'm to be scalped at daybreak. By Geronimo, that kid can kick hard." Yes, sir. That boy seemed to be having the time of his life. The fun of camping out in a cave had made him forget that he was a captive himself. He immediately christened me Snake Eye the Spy, and announced that when his braves returned from the warpath, I was to be broiled at the stake at the rising of the sun. Then we had supper, and he filled his mouth full of bacon and bread and gravy and began to talk. He made a during dinner speech something like this: "I like this fine. I never camped out before, but I had a pet possum once, and I was 9 last birthday. I hate to go to school. Rats ate up 16 of Jimmy Talbot's aunt's speckled hen's eggs. Are there any real Indians in these woods? I want some more gravy. Does the trees move and make the wind blow? We had 5 puppies. What makes your nose so red, Hank? My father has lots of money. Are the stars hot? I whipped Ed Walker twice Saturday. I don't like girls. You dasn't catch toads unless with a string. Do oxen make any noise? Why are oranges round? Have you got beds to sleep on in this cave? Amos Murray has got 6 toes. A parrot can talk, but a monkey or fish can't. How many does it take to make 12? Every few minutes he would remember that he was a pesky redskin and pick up his stick rifle and tiptoe to the mouth of the cave to rubber for the scouts of the hated paleface. Now and then he would let out a war whoop that made old Hank the Trapper shiver. That boy had Bill terrorized from the start. "Red Chief," says I to the kid, "would you like to go home?" "Aw, what for?" says he. "I don't have any fun at home. I hate to go to school. I like to camp out. You won't take me back again, Snake Eye, will ya?" "Not right away," says I. We'll stay here in the cave a while." "All right," says he. "That'll be fine. I never had such fun in all my life." We went to bed around 11 o'clock. We spread down some wide blankets and quilts and put Red Chief between us. We weren't afraid he'd run away. He kept us awake for 3 hours, jumping up and reaching for his rifle and screeching, "Sst, Bart," in mine and Bill's ears, and as the fancied crackle of a twig or the rustle of a leaf revealed to his young imagination the stealthy approach of the outlaw band. At last I fell into a troubled sleep, and I dreamed that I had been kidnapped and chained to a tree by a ferocious pirate with red hair. Just at daybreak, I was awakened by a series of awful screams from Bill. They weren't yells or howls or shouts or whoops or yelps, such as you'd expect from a manly set of vocal organs. They were simply indecent, terrifying, humiliating screams, such as women emit when they see ghosts or caterpillars. It's an awful thing to hear a strong, desperate, fat man scream incontinently in a cave at daybreak. I jumped up to see what the matter was. Red Chief was sitting on Bill's chest, with one hand twined in Bill's hair. In the other, he had a sharp case knife we used for slicing bacon, and he was industriously and realistically trying to take Bill's scalp, according to the sentence that had been pronounced upon him the evening before. I got the knife away from the kid and made him lie down again. But from that moment, Bill's spirit was broken. He laid down on his side of the bed, but he never closed an eye again in sleep as long as that boy was with us. I dozed off for a while, but along toward sunup I remembered that Red Chief had said I was to be burned at the stake at the rising of the sun. I wasn't nervous or afraid, but I sat up and lit my pipe and leaned against a rock. "What are you getting up so soon for, Sam?" asked Bill. "Me?" says I. "Oh, I got kind of a pain in my shoulder. I thought sitting up would rest it." "You're a liar," says Bill. "You're afraid. You was to be burned at sunrise, and you was afraid he'd do it. And he would, too, if he could find a match. Ain't it awful, Sam? You think anybody'll pay out money to get a little imp like that back home?" "Sure," said I. "A rowdy little kid like that is just the kind that parents dote on. Now you and the Chief get up and cook breakfast, while I go up on top of this mountain and reconnoiter." I went up to the peak of the little mountain and ran my eye over the contiguous vicinity. Over toward summit I expected to see the sturdy yeomanry of the village armed with scythes and pitchforks, beating the countryside for the dastardly kidnappers. But what I saw was a peaceful landscape, dotted with one man plowing with a dun mule. Nobody was dragging the creek. No couriers dashed hither and yon, bringing tidings of no news to the distracted parents. There was a sylvan attitude of somnolent sleepiness pervading that section of the external outward surface of Alabama that lay exposed to my view. "Perhaps," says I to myself, "it has not yet been discovered that the wolves have borne away the tender lambkin from the fold." "Heaven help the wolves," says I, and I went down the mountain to breakfast. When I got to the cave, I found Bill backed up against the side of it, breathing hard, and the boy threatening to smash him with a rock half as big as a coconut. "He put a red-hot boiled potato down my back," explained Bill, "and then mashed it with his foot, and I boxed his ears. Have you got a gun about you, Sam?" I took the rock away from the boy and kind of patched up the argument. "I'll fix you," said the kid to Bill. "No man ever yet struck the Red Chief but what he got paid for it. You better beware." After breakfast, the kid takes a piece of leather with strings wrapped around it out of his pocket and goes outside the cave unwinding it. "What's he up to now?" says Bill anxiously. "You don't think he'll run away, do you, Sam?" "No fear of it," says I. "He don't seem to be much of a homebody, but we've got to fix up some plan about the ransom. There don't seem to be much excitement around Summit on account of his disappearance, but maybe they haven't realized yet that he's gone. His folks may think he's spending the night with Aunt Jane or one of the neighbors. Anyhow, he'll be missed today. Tonight we must get a message to his father demanding the $2,000 for his return." Just then we heard a kind of war whoop, such as David might have emitted when he knocked out the champion Goliath. It was a sling that Red Chief had pulled out of his pocket, and he was whirling it around his head. I dodged and heard a heavy thud and kind of a sigh from Bill, like a horse gives out when you take his saddle off. A rock the size of an egg had caught Bill just behind his left ear. He loosened himself all over and fell in the fire across the frying pan of hot water for washing the dishes. I dragged him out and poured cold water on his head for half an hour. By and by, Bill sits up and feels behind his ear and says, "Sam, do you know who my favorite biblical character is?" "Take it easy," says I. "You'll come to your senses presently." "King Herod," he says. "You won't go away and leave me here alone, will you, Sam?" I went out and caught that boy and shook him until his freckles rattled. "If you don't behave," says I, "I'll take you straight home. Now, are you going to be good or not?" "I was only funning," he said sullenly. "I didn't mean to hurt old Hank. But what did he hit me for? I'll behave, Snake Eye, if you won't send me home, and if you let me play the Black Scout today." "I don't know the game," says I. "That's for you and Mr. Bill to decide. He's your playmate for the day. I'm going away for a while on business. Now you come in and make friends with him and say you're sorry for hurting him, or home you go at once." I made him and Bill shake hands, and then I took Bill aside and told him I was going to Poplar Cove, a little village 3 miles from the cave, and find out what I could about how the kidnapping had been regarded in Summit. Also, I thought it best to send a peremptory letter to old man Dorset that day, demanding the ransom and dictating how it should be paid. "You know, Sam," says Bill, "I've stood by you without batting an eye in earthquakes, fire and flood, and poker games, dynamite outrages, police raids, train robberies, and cyclones. I never lost my nerve yet till we kidnapped that 2-legged skyrocket of a kid. He's got me going. You won't leave me long with him, will you, Sam?" "I'll be back sometime this afternoon," says I. "You must keep the boy amused and quiet till I return. And now we'll write the letter to old Dorset." Bill and I got paper and pencil and worked on the letter while Red Chief, with a blanket wrapped around him, strutted up and down, guarding the mouth of the cave. Bill begged me, tearfully, to make the ransom $1,500 instead of $2,000. "I ain't attempting," says he, "to decry the celebrated moral aspect of parental affection, but we're dealing with humans, and it ain't human for anybody to give up $2,000 for that 40-pound chunk of freckled wildcat. I'm willing to take a chance of $1,500. You can charge the difference to me." So, to relieve Bill, I acceded, and we collaborated a letter that ran this way: "Ebenezer Dorset, Esquire, we have your boy concealed in a place far from Summit. It is useless for you or the most skillful detectives to attempt to find him. Absolutely, the only terms on which you can have him restored to you are these. We demand $1,500 in large bills for his return. The money to be left at midnight tonight, at the same spot and in the same box as your reply, as hereinafter described. If you agree to these terms, send your answer in writing by a solitary messenger tonight at 8:30. After crossing Owl Creek, on the road to Poplar Cove, there are 3 large trees about 100 yards apart, close to the fence of the wheat field on the right-hand side. At the bottom of the fence post, opposite the 3rd tree, will be found a small pasteboard box. The messenger will place the answer in this box and return immediately to Summit. If you attempt any treachery or fail to comply with our demand as stated, you will never see your boy again. If you pay the money as demanded, he will be returned to you safe and well within 3 hours. These terms are final, and if you do not accede to them, no further communication will be attempted. 2 desperate men." I addressed this letter to Dorset and put it in my pocket. As I was about to start, the kid comes up to me and says, "Oh, Snake Eye, you said I could play the Black Scout while you was gone." "Play it, of course," says I. "Mr. Bill will play with you. What kind of a game is it?" "I'm the Black Scout," says Red Chief, "and I have to ride to the stockade to warn the settlers that the Indians are coming. I'm tired of playing Indian myself. I want to be the Black Scout." "All right," says I. "Sounds harmless to me. I guess Mr. Bill will help you foil those pesky savages." "What am I to do?" asked Bill, looking at the kid suspiciously. "You are the hoss," says Black Scout. "Get down on your hands and knees. How can I ride to the stockade without a hoss?" "You'd better keep him interested," said I, "till we get the scheme going. Loosen up." Bill gets down on his all fours, and a look comes in his eye like a rabbit's when you catch it in a trap. "How far is it to the stockade, kid?" he asks in a husky manner of voice. 90 miles, says the Black Scout, and you have to hump yourself to get there on time. Whoa, now! The Black Scout jumps on Bill's back and digs his heels in his side. "For heaven's sake," says Bill, "hurry back, Sam, soon as you can. I wish we hadn't made that ransom more than 1,000. Say, you quit kicking me or I'll get up and warm you good." I walked over to Poplar Cove and sat around the post office and store, talking with the chawbacons that came in to trade. One whiskerando says that he hears Summit is all upset on account of Elder Ebenezer Dorset's boy having been lost or stolen. That was all I wanted to know. I bought some smoking tobacco, referred casually to the price of black-eyed peas, posted my letter surreptitiously, and came away. The postmaster said the mail carrier would come by in an hour to take the mail on to Summit. When I got back to the cave, Bill and the boy were not to be found. I explored the vicinity of the cave and risked a yodel or two, but there was no response. So I lighted my pipe and sat down on a mossy bank to await developments. In about a half an hour, I heard the bushes rustle, and Bill wobbled out into the little glade in front of the cave. Behind him was the kid, stepping softly like a scout, with a broad grin on his face. Bill stopped, took off his hat, and wiped his face with a red handkerchief. The kid stopped about 8 feet behind him. "Sam," says Bill, "I suppose you'll think I'm a renegade, but I couldn't help it. I'm a grown person with masculine proclivities and habits of self-defense, but there is a time when all systems of egotism and predominance fail. The boy's gone. I have sent him home. All is off. There was martyrs in old times," goes on Bill, "that suffered death rather than give up the particular graft they enjoyed. None of them ever was subjugated to such supernatural tortures as I have been. I've tried to be faithful to our articles of depredation, but there came a limit." "What's the trouble, Bill?" I asks him. "I was rode," says Bill, "the 90 miles to the stockade, not barring an inch. Then, when the settlers was rescued, I was given oats. Sand ain't a palatable substitute. And then, for an hour, I had to explain to him why there was nothing in holes, how a road can run both ways, and what makes the grass green. I tell you, Sam, a human can only stand so much. I takes him by the neck of his clothes and drags him down the mountain. On the way he kicks my legs black and blue from the knees down, and I've got to have 2 or 3 bites on my thumb and hand cauterized. But he's gone," continues Bill, "gone home. I showed him the road to Summit and kicked him about 8 feet near there at one kick. I'm sorry we lose the ransom, but it was either that or Bill Driscoll to the madhouse." Bill is puffing and blowing, but there is a look of ineffable peace and growing contentment on his rose-pink features. "Bill," says I, "there isn't any heart disease in your family, is there?" "No," says Bill, "nothing chronic except malaria and accidents." "Why?" "Then you might turn around," says I, "and have a look behind you." Bill turns and sees the boy and loses his complexion and sits down plump on the ground and begins to pluck aimlessly at grass and little sticks. For an hour I was afraid for his mind. And then I told him that my scheme was to put the whole job through immediately and that we would get the ransom and be off with it by midnight if old Dorset fell in with our proposition. So Bill braced up enough to give the kid a weak sort of smile and a promise to play the Russian and the Japanese war with him as soon as he felt a little better. I had a scheme for collecting that ransom without danger of being caught by counterplots that ought to commend itself to professional kidnappers. It was close to the road fence with big, bare fields on all sides. If a gang of constables should be watching for anyone to come for the note, they could see him a long way off crossing the fields or in the road, but no siree. At 8:30 I was up in that tree as well hidden as a tree toad, waiting for the messenger to arrive. Exactly on time, a half-grown boy rides up the road on a bicycle, locates the pasteboard box at the foot of the fence post, slips a folded piece of paper into it, and pedals away again back toward Summit. I waited an hour and then concluded the thing was square. I slid down the tree, got the note, slipped along the fence till I struck the woods, and was back at the cave in another half an hour. I opened the note, got near the lantern, and read it to Bill. It was written with a pen in a crabbed hand, and the sum and substance of it was this: "Two desperate men. Gentlemen, I received your letter today by post in regard to the ransom you ask for the return of my son. I think you are a little high in your demands, and I hereby make you a counter-proposition, which I am inclined to believe you will accept. You bring Johnny home and pay me $250 in cash, and I agree to take him off your hands. You'd better come at night, for the neighbors believe he is lost, and I couldn't be responsible for what they would do to anybody they saw bringing him back. Very respectfully, Ebenezer Dorset." "Great pirates of Penzance," says I, "of all the impudent—" But I glanced at Bill and hesitated. He had the most appealing look in his eyes I ever saw in the face of a dumb or a talking brute. "Sam," says he, "what's $250 after all? We got the money. One more night of this kid will send me to a bed in Bedlam. Besides being a thorough gentleman, I think Mr. Dorset is a spendthrift for making us such a liberal offer. You ain't going to let the chance go, are you?" "Tell you the truth, Bill," says I, "this little ewe lamb has somewhat got on my nerves, too. We'll take him home, pay the ransom, and make our getaway." We took him home that night. We got him to go by telling him that his father had bought a silver-mounted rifle and a pair of moccasins for him, and we were going to hunt bears the next day. It was just 12 o'clock when we knocked at Ebenezer's front door. Just at the moment when I should have been abstracting the $1,500 from the box under the tree, according to the original proposition, Bill was counting out $250 into Dorset's hand. When the kid found out we were going to leave him at home, he started up a howl like a calliope and fastened himself as tight as a leech to Bill's leg. His father peeled him away gradually like a porous plaster. "How long can you hold him?" asked Bill. "I'm not as strong as I used to be," says old Dorset, "but I think I can promise you 10 minutes. "Enough," says Bill. "In 10 minutes I shall cross the central, southern, and middle western states and be legging it trippingly for the Canadian border." And as dark as it was, and as fat as Bill was, and a good a runner as I am, he was a good mile and a half out of Summit before I could catch up with him.
$1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week, it did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below was a letter-box into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, though, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim, and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $187 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there are two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day to dry just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her, and then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sophronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sophronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practised hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, in the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stair away down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying a little silent prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I'm still pretty."
The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow. He was only 22, and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him.
"Jim, darling, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? Oh, I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you."
"You cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone?" he said with an air of almost idiocy.
"You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone, too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered, but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?"
Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week, or $1 million a year, what's the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it on the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell, with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in that beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession, and now they were hers. But the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit.
"Isn't it dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it."
Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep 'em a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasure of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Everywhere, they are wisest. They are the Magi. A Call Loan by O.Henry. In those days, the cattlemen were the anointed. They were the grandees of the grass, kings of the kine, lords of the lea, barons of beef and bone. They might have ridden in golden chariots had their taste so inclined. The cattleman was caught in a stampede of dollars. It seemed to him that he had more money than was decent. But when he had bought a watch with precious stones set in the case so large that they hurt his ribs, and a California saddle with silver nails and Angora skin suaderos, and ordered everybody up to the bar for a whiskey, what else was there for him to spend money for? Not so circumscribed in the expedient for the reduction of surplus wealth were those lairds of the lariat who had womenfolk to their name. In the breast of the rib-sprung sex, the genius of purse-lightening may slumber through years of inopportunity, but never, my brothers, does it become extinct. So out of the chaparral came Long Bill Longley from the Bar Circle branch on the Frio, a wife-driven man, to taste the urban joys of success. Something like $500,000 he had, with an income steadily increasing. Long Bill was a graduate of the camp and trail. Luck and thrift, a cool head, and a telescopic eye for mavericks had raised him from cowboy to be a cowman. Then came the boom in cattle, and Fortune, stepping gingerly among the cactus thorns, came and emptied her cornucopia at the doorstep of the ranch. In the little frontier city of Chaparosa, Longley built a costly residence. Here he became a captive, bound to the chariot of social existence. He was doomed to become a leading citizen. He struggled for a time like a mustang in his first corral, and then he hung up his quirt and spurs. Time hung heavily on his hands. He organized the First National Bank of Chaparosa and was elected its president. One day, a dyspeptic man wearing double magnifying glasses inserted an official-looking card between the bars of the cashier's window of the First National Bank. 5 minutes later, the bank force was dancing at the beck and call of a national bank examiner. This examiner, Mr. J. Edgar Todd, proved to be a thorough one. At the end of it all, the examiner put on his hat and called the president, Mr. William R. Longley, into the private office. "Well, how do you find things?" asked Longley in his slow, deep tones. "Any brands in the roundup you didn't like the looks of?" "The bank checks up all right, Mr. Longley," said Todd, "and I find your loans in very good shape, with one exception. You are carrying one very bad bit of paper, one that is so bad that I have been thinking that you surely do not realize the serious position it places you in. I refer to a call loan of $10,000 made to Thomas Merwin. Not only is the amount in excess of the maximum sum the bank can loan any individual legally, but it is absolutely without endorsement or security. Thus you have doubly violated the national banking laws and laid yourself open to criminal prosecution by the government. A report of the matter to the comptroller of the currency, which I am bound to make, would, I am sure, result in the matter being turned over to the Department of Justice for action. You see what a serious thing it is." Bill Longley was leaning his lengthy, slowly moving frame back in his swivel chair. His hands were clasped behind his head, and he turned a little to look the examiner in the face. The examiner was surprised to see a smile creep about the rugged mouth of the banker and a kindly twinkle in his light blue eyes. If he saw the seriousness of the affair, it did not show in his countenance. "Of course, you don't know Tom Merwin," said Longley almost genially. "Yes, I know about that loan. It hadn't any security except Tom Merwin's word. Somehow I've always found that when a man's word is good, it's the best security there is. Oh, yes, I know the government doesn't think so. I guess I'll see Tom about that note." Mr. Todd's dyspepsia seemed to grow suddenly worse. He looked at the chaparral banker through his double magnifying glasses in amazement. "You see," said Longley, easily explaining the thing away, "Tom heard of 2,000 head of 2-year-olds down near Rocky Ford on the Rio Grande that could be had for $8 a head. I reckon 'twas one of old Leandro Garcia's outfits that he had smuggled over, and he wanted to make a quick turn on 'em. Those cattle are worth $15 on the hoof in Kansas City. Tom knew it, and I knew it. He had 6,000, and I let him have the 10,000 to make the deal with. His brother Ed took 'em on to market 3 weeks ago. He ought to be back most any day now with the money. When it comes, Tom will pay that note." The bank examiner was shocked. It was perhaps his duty to step out to the telegraph office and wire the situation to the comptroller, but he did not. He talked pointedly and effectively to Longley for 3 minutes. He succeeded in making the banker understand that he stood upon the border of a catastrophe, and then he offered a tiny loophole of escape. "I am going to Hilldale's tonight," he told Longley, "to examine a bank there. I will pass through Chaparosa on my way back. At 12 o'clock tomorrow I shall call at this bank. If this loan has been cleared out of the way by that time, it will not be mentioned in my report. If not, I will have to do my duty." With that, the examiner bowed and departed. The president of the First National lounged in his chair half an hour longer, and then he lit a mild cigar and went over to Tom Merwin's house. Merwin, a ranchman in duck brown with a contemplative eye, sat with his feet upon a table, plating a rawhide quirt. "Tom," said Longley, leaning against the table, "you heard anything from Ed yet?" "Not yet," said Merwin, continuing his plating. "I guess Ed'll be along back now in a few days." "There was a bank examiner," said Longley, "nosing around our place today, and he bucked a sight about that note of yours. You know I know it's all right, but the thing is against the banking laws. I was pretty sure you'd have paid it off before the bank was examined again, but the son of a gun slipped in on us, Tom. Now, I'm short of cash myself just now, or I'd let you have the money to take it up with. I've got till 12 o'clock tomorrow, and then I've got to show the cash in place of that note, or what, Bill?" asked Merwin, as Longley hesitated. "Well, I suppose it means be jumped on with both of Uncle Sam's feet. I'll try to raise the money for you on time," said Merwin, interested in his plating. "All right, Tom," concluded Longley as he turned toward the door. "I knew you would if you could." Merwin threw down his whip and went to the only other bank in town, a private one run by Cooper and Craig. "Cooper," he said to the partner by that name, "I've got to have 10,000 a day or tomorrow. I've got a house and lot there that's worth about 6,000, and that's all the actual collateral. But I've got a cattle deal on that's sure to bring me in more than that much profit within a few days." Cooper began to cough. "Now, for God's sake, don't say no," said Merwin. "I owe that much money on a call loan. It's been called, and the man that called it is a man I've laid on the same blanket with on cow camps and ranger camps for 10 years. He can call anything I've got. He can call the blood out of my veins and it'll come. He's got to have the money. He's in a devil of... Well, he needs the money, and I've got to get it for him. You know my word's good, Cooper." "No doubt about it," assented Cooper urbanely, "but I've a partner, you know. I'm not free in making loans. And if you had the best security in your hands, Merwin, we couldn't accommodate you in less than a week. We're just making a shipment of 15,000 to Mayer Brothers in Rockdale to buy cotton with. It goes down on the narrow gauge tonight. That leaves our cash quite short at present. Sorry we can't arrange it for you." Merwin went back to his little bare office and plated at his quirt again. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he went to the First National Bank and leaned over the railing of Longley's desk. "I'll try to get that money for you tomorrow, Bill." "All right, Tom," said Longley quietly. At 9 o'clock that night, Tom Merwin stepped cautiously out of the small frame house in which he lived. It was near the edge of the little town, and few citizens were in the neighborhood at that hour. Merwin wore 2 six-shooters in a belt and a slouch hat. He moved swiftly down a lonely street and then followed the sandy road that ran parallel to the narrow-gauge track until he reached the water tank 2 miles below the town. There Tom Merwin stopped, tied a black silk handkerchief about the lower part of his face, and pulled his hat down low. In 10 minutes, the night train for Rockdale pulled up at the tank, having come from Chaparrosa. With a gun in each hand, Merwin raised himself from behind a clump of chaparral and started for the engine. But before he had taken 3 steps, 2 long, strong arms clasped him from behind, and he was lifted from his feet and thrown face downward upon the grass. There was a heavy knee pressing against his back and an iron hand grasping each of his wrists. It was held thus, like a child, until the engine had taken water and until the train had moved, with accelerating speed, out of sight. Then he was released and rose to his feet to face Bill Longley. "The case never needed to be fixed up this way, Tom," said Longley. "I saw Cooper this evening, and he told you what you and him talked about. Then I went down to your house tonight and saw you come out with your guns on, and I followed you. Let's go back, Tom." They walked away together, side by side. "'Twas the only chance I saw," said Merwin presently. "You called your loan, and I tried to answer you. Now what'll you do, Bill, if they sock it to you?" "What would you do if they'd socked it to you?" was the answer Longley made. "I never thought I'd lay in a bush to stick up a train," remarked Merwin. "But a call loan's different. A call's a call with me. We've got 12 hours yet, Bill, before this spy jumps onto you. We've got to raise them spondulicks somehow. Maybe we can—" "Great Sam Houston, do you hear that?" Merwin broke into a run, and Longley kept with him, hearing only a rather pleasing whistle somewhere in the night rendering a lugubrious air of the cowboy's lament. "It's the only tune he knows," shouted Merwin as he ran. "I'll bet—" They were at the door of Merwin's house. He kicked it open and fell over an old valise lying in the middle of the floor. A sunburned, firm-jawed youth, stained by travel, lay upon the bed, puffing at a brown cigarette. "What's the word, Ed?" gasped Merwin. "So, drawled that capable youngster. "Just got in on the 9:30. Sold the bunch for 15 straight. Now, buddy, you want to quit kicking a valise around that's got $29,000 in greenbacks in its innards?" And today I'm extraordinarily happy to introduce my little brother, Jesse Phillips, on the show. Say hello, Jesse.
Hello.
That was Jesse. And we're packed into my little closet studio. And
cheek to jowl, as they say.
Cheek to jowl. Yes. And, but anyway, we are going to read, well, first, Jesse, tell us about yourself.
About myself. Tell us about myself. Well, my name is Jesse R. Phillips. I was born at a very young age. Not far from here. Is that what you want to know?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Of course, everybody was born at a young age. I don't know why I felt the need to say that. Was that weird?
Well, it was true.
It is true. I was born at a young age. Anyway, I am married. I am married. I am still married. If my bride is listening to this, I'm still married to you. Yes, I'm married, have 3 beautiful children. I am a photographer, filmmaker, content creator. Also do social media marketing and a bunch of other things like that. I'm also the Marine Corps Reserve, just got back from Afghanistan, and now I am sitting in a closet with my brother, talking to millions and millions of people, and I'm a little nervous because I don't like reading in front of people, and now I'm going to read to the droves of the Pulp Culture Bumpkins fan base, and I don't know if I can handle it at this point in my life, but hey, you got to start somewhere. I'm going to be a famous actor one day.
Why not start at the top? You know what I'm saying?
I'm going to be so famous one day, but I have to start somewhere.
At the top. You're starting at the top is what you're doing.
I'm starting at the top.
You got nowhere to go but down, so don't mess it up. Okay? Deep breath. All right. A Retrieved Reformation by O.Henry. So, Jesse, how are we doing this?
I will attempt to read this, but it has big words in it, like escorted and pardon.
And shoe shop.
So I will try to narrate this bugger, and we will see. Let me narrate it. Let me read the narration portions of it.
Okay.
I don't know the lingo of voice acting and voiceovers like you do. Is that what you say?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to read it, and you can be all the other parts.
Got it.
Because, yeah.
Okay.
I'm super Lackadaisical. Not lackadaisical. What's dyslexic?
Ooh.
Dyslexic. I read things backwards and I say things backwards, and all the words mesh together. So, this should be fun. Should I begin?
Just a few more lip smacks. Now we're ready.
Take a swig of my iced tea. So nervous. All right. Hang on to your hats, folks. This is going to be a bumpy ride. So nervous. All right. A guard came to the prison shoe shop where Jimmy Valentine was assiduously stitching uppers, escorted him to the front office. This is so rough already. Are you sure you want me on your show? Goodness gracious. Do I start over? You're going to bleep that out? What?
I'll bleep it out if it's too bad.
Okay, thank you. I would hate for the world to see me in this state. There the warden handed Jimmy his pardon, which had been signed that morning by the governor. Jimmy took it. Why are you laughing at me? Stop. The words were touching each other.
I know. It's terrible. Backwards,
it's
too.
A disease. Oh! Bob Saget. I'd hit it and the page turned. I do real paper. I don't do Kindle Fires or whatever. Amazon Primes or... What is that? Can you turn... What is that? Something just popped up on the screen, folks, and I don't know what it... All right. Okay. Should I start from the top?
Nah, just keep going.
Okay. A guard came to the prison shoe shop where Jimmy Valentine was assiduously stitching uppers and escorted him to the front office. There, the warden handed Jimmy his pardon, which had been signed that morning by the governor. Jimmy took it in a tired kind of way. He served nearly 10 months of a 4-year sentence. He had expected to stay only about 3 months, at the longest. When a man with as many friends on the outside as Jimmy Valentine had is received in the stir, it is hardly worthwhile to cut his hair.
Now, Valentine,
said the warden,
you'll go out in the morning. Brace up and make a man of yourself. You're not a bad fellow at heart. Stop cracking safes and live straight. Me?
Said Jimmy, in surprise.
Why, I never cracked a safe in my life. Oh, no?
Laughed the warden.
Of course not. Let me see now. How was it you happened to get sent up on that Springfield job? Was it because you wouldn't prove an alibi for fear of compromising somebody in extremely high-toned society? Or was it simply a case of a mean old jury that had it in for you? It's always one or the other with you innocent victims. Me?
Said Jimmy, still blankly virtuous.
Why, Warden, I never was in Springfield in my life. Take 'em back, Cronin,
said the warden,
and fix 'em up with outgoing clothes. Unlock 'em at 7 in the morning and let 'em come to the bullpen. Better think over my advice, Valentine.
As 7:15 on the next morning, Jimmy stood in the warden's outer office. He had on a suit of the villainously fitting ready-made clothes and pair of... Was that the right word?
Yeah.
Villainously?
Yeah,
That's a big word.
It didn't fit well.
It didn't fit.
Awful.
It did not...
Arrgh.
Villainously. Goodness gracious, that was a great way to use that word. He had on a suit of the villainously fitting ready-made clothes and a pair of the stiff, squeaky shoes that the state furnished to its discharged compulsory guests. The clerk handed him a railroad ticket and the $5 bill with which the law expected him to rehabilitate himself into good citizenship and prosperity. The warden gave him a cigar and shook his hand. Valentine, 9762, was chronicled on the books, pardoned by the governor, and Mr. James Valentine walked out into the sunshine. Disregarding the song of the birds, the waving green trees, and the smell of the flowers, Jimmy headed straight for the restaurant. There he tasted the first sweet joys of liberty in the shape of a broiled chicken and a bottle of white wine, followed by a cigar and a grade better than one. Bob Saget. Followed by a cigar and a grade better than the one the warden had given him.
Wait, time out. Do you always say cigar? You watch a lot of westerns, don't you? You do. It's okay. I was just wondering.
That's a trap.
No, I like it. It gives it character.
I always say cigar.
Cigar?
It's a C-gar. C-I-gar.
Okay.
Cigar. I always say that.
Okay.
I've always said that. Grandpa smoked cigars when we were children, and I called him that when I was a child with you in North Carolina. Remember?
I remember.
Grandpa's cigars?
All right.
What do you call them?
Cigar.
Just plain old cigar?
That's a lot more boring. You keep rolling.
Okay. Can I say cigar for this one?
Yes.
Thank you. Please don't try to change me.
I won't.
I want to stay who I am. Where were we, Jake?
Followed by a cigar, a grade better than the one the warden had given him.
Okay. From there, he proceeded leisurely to the depot. I could say depot, but I knew that you wouldn't like that. I'll just say depot.
Nice.
He tossed a quarter into the hat of a blind man sitting by the door and boarded his train. 3 hours set him down in a little town near the state line. He went to the cafe of one Mike Dolan and shook hands with Mike, who was alone behind the bar.
Sorry we couldn't make it sooner, Jimmy, my boy,
said Mike.
But we had that protest from Springfield to buck against, and the governor nearly balked. Feeling all right? Fine,
said Jimmy.
Got my key?
He got his key and went upstairs, unlocking the door of a room at the rear. Everything was just as he had left it. There on the floor was still Ben Price's collar button that had been torn from the eminent detective's shirt. Bob Saget! I got ahead of myself. I thought I had it. Cut that out. Throw it away. Don't let the world see me in this play, please. I look hideous right now. I sound hideous. I'm a monster. I hate myself, my dyslexic brain. Everything was just as he had left it. There on the floor was still Ben Price's collar button that had been torn from the eminent detective's shirt band where they had overpowered Jimmy to arrest him. Pulling out from the wall a folding bed, Jimmy slid back. Goodness gracious. Why did you have me on your reading podcast? You know I can't read. Pulling out from the wall a folding bed, Jimmy, stop laughing in my ear.
I am not laughing. That was somebody else.
Your fans will never have me back. Pulling out from the wall a folding bed, Jimmy slid back a panel in the wall and dragged out a dust-covered suitcase. He opened this and gazed fondly at the finest set of burglar tools. He pulled out a set of burglar tools. Burglar tools. He opened this and gazed fondly at the finest set of burglar tools in the East. It was a complete set made of specifically. Now you know that the disease is real. It's not fake. It was a complete set made of specially tempered steel. The latest designs in drills, punches, braces, and bits. Jimmy's clamps and augers, with 2 or 3 novelties invented by Jimmy himself, in which he took pride. Over $900 they had cost him to have made. A place where they made such things for his profession. In half an hour, Jimmy went downstairs through the cafe. He was now dressed in tasteful and well-fitting clothes, and carried his dusted and cleaned suitcase in his hand.
Got anything on?
Asked Mike Dillon genuinely.
Me?
Said Jimmy in a puzzled tone.
I don't understand. I'm representing the New York Amalgamated Short Snap Biscuit Cracker and Frazzled Wheat Company.
This statement delighted Mike to such an extent that Jimmy had to take a saucer milk on the... All right, cut.
Bob Saget.
Bob Saget. Insert Bob Saget. Cut. Rewind. Cut that out. I don't want the audience to see me in this state. This statement delighted Mike to such an extent that Jimmy had to... Can I take this time to just apologize to your millions of fans? Because I want to crawl under this booth. Okay.
Oh, you're doing great.
Okay, thanks. That's what I needed. It is so hot in here. Goodness.
I told you, but you wanted to keep that giant hoodie on. Don't come whining to me, sport.
This statement delighted Mike to such an extent that Jimmy had to take a salter and milk on the spot. He never touched hard drinks. A week after the release of Valentine, 9762, there was a neat job of safe burglary done in Richmond, Indiana, with no clue. A week after the release of Valentine, 9762, there was a neat job of safe burglary done in Richmond, Indiana, with no clue to the author. A scant $800 was all that was secured. 2 weeks after the patented and proved burglary-proof safe in Logansport was opened like a cheese to the tune of Open like a cheese. Did I read that right?
Open like a cheese.
I didn't bumble on that one?
A lot of the old, no.
It opened like a cheese. Folks, that safe opened like a cheese. Whatever that means. But I like it. Okay. 2 weeks after that, okay, to the tune of $1,500. Currency, securities, and silver untouched. That began to interest the road catchers. Then an old-fashioned bank safe in Jefferson City became active, and throughout. I'm sorry. It was funny at first. It's not funny now. I'm ashamed. I'm mortified. If Mom heard this, the one that taught me to read, like,
did she teach you?
She tried. Bob Saget. That began to interest the road catchers. Then an old-fashioned bank safe in Jefferson City became active, and throughout of its crater erupted a banknotes amounting to Why are you laughing?
No, that's not what it said. It reminded me of a guy going through the thick jungle with a machete.
I wish I was that cool right now, but I
was just like, well, how is it? But it said eruption, and you said erupted of banknotes.
I can't read.
Eruption. Because you
if I just keep going, nobody will notice. Sweat is pouring off of my body. My throat is parched. I can't read, and this is public humiliation. Why did you trap me? You pulled me into your closet to trap me. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, folks. I am not usually this. 2 weeks after that patented and proved burglary-proof safe in Longsport was opened like a cheese to the tune of $1,500, currency, securities, and silver untouched. That began to interest the road catchers. Then an old-fashioned bank safe in Jefferson City became active, and threw out of its crater an eruption of banknotes amounting to $5,000. The losses were... I got through that one. I got through it. It was ugly, but I got through it. The losses were now high enough to bring the matter up into Ben Price's class of work. By comparing notes, a remarkable similarity in the methods of burglary was noticed. Ben Price investigated the scenes of the robberies and was heard to remark,
"That's Dandy Jim Valentine's autograph. He's resumed business. Look at that combination knob. Jerked out as easy as pulling up a radish in wet weather. He's got the only clamps that can do it. And look how clean those tumblers were punched out. Jimmy never has to drill but one hole. Yes, I guess I want Mr. Valentine. He'll do his... He'll do his bit next time without any short time or clemency foolishness."
Ben Price knew Jimmy's habits. He had learned them while working up the Springfield case. Long jumps, quick getaways, no Confederates, and a taste for good society. These ways had helped Mr. Valentine to become noted as a successful dodger of retribution. It was given out that Ben Price had taken up the trail of an elusive craftsman and other people with burglar-proof safe. I'm not a quitter. I'm a winner, so I will continue to read.
This is your chosen reservoir.
It was given out that Ben Price had taken up the trail of the elusive cracksman, and other people with burglar-proof safes felt more at ease. One afternoon, Jimmy Valentine and his suitcase climbed out of a mail hack in Elmore, a little town 5 miles off the railroad down in the blackjack country of Arkansas. Jimmy, looking like an athletic young senior just came from college, went down the board sidewalk toward the hotel. I hope Mama doesn't listen to this. A young lady crossed the street, passed him at the corner, and entered a door over which was the sign, "The Elmore Bank." Jimmy Valentine looked into her eyes, forgot what he was, and became another man. She lowered her eyes and colored slightly. Young men of Jimmy's style and looks were scarce in Elmore. Jimmy collared a boy that was loafing on the steps of the bank, as if he were one of the stockholders. That's funny.
That's funny.
That's funny.
Yeah,
hey, we're laughing, and it's not at me. It's
no,
at the
we're
writer.
laughing at the writing. That's good. Good job, O.
Good job, O.Henry. and began. Okay, Jim. Where should I start now? Because I laughed and it was funny.
Jimmy collared a boy.
Jimmy collared a boy.
We'll hear the joke again.
Jimmy collared a boy that was loafing on the steps of the bank as if he were one of the stockholders, and began to ask him questions about the town, feeding him dimes at intervals. By and by, the young lady came out, looking royally... This didn't fit right there. I thought that's what it said.
Well, it's about to say what she's unconscious of, not that she's... This...
Sounds like she's laying on the ground.
I know, but that's because you can't see it. Looking royally unconscious of the young man with a suitcase, you know.
Oh, okay. See,
but this right
classic.
here, all right, back to this is a hilarious sentence. As if he were one of the stockholders, and began to ask him questions about the town, feeding him dimes. And it was like every couple minutes.
It's like, here's a dime.
So the kid just keeps talking. That's pretty funny.
And he was just waiting for the pretty lady to come back out.
Exactly.
Jimmy and I would get along, even though he's a rotten
cracks man.
Rotten cracks man. He's a cracks man. Or is he like Superman? Or
you
Robin
can be
Hood?
Cool and be evil.
Is he like?
I'm not saying he's a good guy.
Okay, cool. By and by, the young lady came out, looking royally unconscious of the young man with the suitcase, and went her way.
Isn't that young lady Polly Simpson?
Asked Jimmy with
I mean, he has a huge vocabulary. Don't worry about it.
I know, and I don't have one at all. And it's really showing.
Specious.
The millions and millions of people that I'm talking to right now are laughing me to scorn. I will never hear the end of this. Everyone I know is listening to this. Everyone I love. Some people I hate.
Right.
Spacious guile, right?
Yeah.
Let's do that again.
All right. Isn't that young lady Polly Simpson?
Asked Jimmy with suspicious guile.
No,
said the boy.
She's Annabelle Adams. Her pa owns this bank. What'd you come to Elmore for? Is that a gold watch chain? I'm going to get a bulldog. Got any more dimes?
That kid's hilarious. Jimmy went to the Planter's Hotel, registered as Ralph D. Spencer, and engaged a room. He leaned on the desk and declared his platform to the clerk. He said he had come to Elmore to look for a location to go into business. How was the shoe business now in this town? He had thought of the shoe business. Was there an opening? The clerk was impressed by the clothes and manner of Jimmy. He himself was something of a pattern of fashion to the thinly gilded youth of Elmore, but he now perceived his shortcomings. Stop laughing at me. He's had a hard time with gilded.
No. That's a funny sentence. That's a great sentence.
That's a funny sentence.
It's like he's the biggest thing in town on fashion, and then Jimmy shows up, and he all of a sudden doesn't feel as tough. That's a good sentence. I like that. Okay. That's what I was laughing at. You did amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Since it's such a good sentence, let me redo it.
Read it again. I want to enjoy it again.
The clerk was impressed by the clothes and manner of Jimmy. He himself was something of a pattern of fashion to the thinly gilded youth of Elmore, but he now perceived his shortcomings. While trying to figure out Jimmy's manner of tying his four in hand, he cordially gave information. Yes, there ought to be a good opening in the shoe line. There wasn't an exclusive shoe store in the place. The dry goods and general store handled them. Business in all lines were fairly good. Hoped Mr. Spencer would decide to locate in Elmore. He would find it a pleasant town to live in, and the people very suitable. Mr. Spencer thought he would stop over in the town a few days and look over the situation. No, the clerk needn't call the boy. He would carry up his suitcase himself. It was rather heavy. Mr. Ralph Spencer, the phoenix that arose from Jimmy Valentine's ashes left by the flame of a sudden alternative attack of love, remained in Elmore and prospered. He opened a shoe store and secured a good run of trade. Socially, he was also a success. He made many friends, and he accomplished the wish of his heart. He met Miss Annabelle Adams and became more and more captivated by her charms. At the end of the year, the situation of Mr. Ralph Spencer was this. He had won the respect of the community. His shoe store was flourishing, and he and Annabelle were engaged to be married in 2 weeks. Mr. Adams, the typical plodding country banker, approved of Spencer. Annabelle's pride in him almost equaled her affection. He was as much at home in the family of Mr. Adams and that of Annabelle's married sister as if he were already a member. One day Jimmy sat down in his room and wrote this letter, which he mailed to the safe address of his old friend in St. Louis.
Dear old pal, I want you to be at Sullivan's place in Little Rock next Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. I want you to wind up some little matters for me. And also, I want to make you a present of my kit of tools. I know you'll be glad to get 'em. You couldn't duplicate the lot for $1,000. Say, Billy, I've quit the old business a year ago. I've got a nice store. I'm making an honest living, and I'm going to marry the finest girl on earth 2 weeks from now. It's the only life, Billy, the straight one. I wouldn't touch a dollar of another man's money now for $1 million. After I get married, I'm going to sell out and go west, where there won't be so much danger of having old scores brought up against me. I tell you, Billy, she's an angel. She believes in me, and I wouldn't do another crooked thing for the whole world. Be sure to be at Sully's, for I must see you. I'll bring along the tools with me. Your old friend, Jimmy.
On the Monday night after Jimmy wrote this letter, Ben Price jogged...
Unobtrusively.
That's a big word.
Big word.
That's a big word. Unobtrusively. Unobtrusively?
Just skip it. Jogged into Elmore.
I can skip word. This isn't the Bible. I can skip words.
You've already done it about 1,000 times.
I didn't mean to on those other ones. Stop publicly humiliating me. Oh my gosh. On the Monday night after Jimmy wrote this letter, Ben Price jogged into Elmore in a livery buggy. He lounged about in town in his quiet way until he found out what he wanted to know. From the drugstore across the street from Spencer's shoe store, he got a good look at Ralph D. Spencer.
Gonna marry the banker's daughter, are you, Jimmy?
Said Ben to himself softly.
Okay, so he's not talking to Jimmy. He's still talking to himself. Okay.
Yes.
Gonna marry the banker's daughter, are you, Jimmy?
Said Ben to himself softly.
Well, I don't know.
The next morning, Jimmy took breakfast at the Adamses. He was going to Little Rock that day to order his wedding suit and buy something nice for Annabelle. That would be the first time he had left town since he came to Elmore. He had been more than a year now since those last professional jobs he had thought he could safely venture out. After breakfast, a quiet family party went down together. Mr. Adams, Annabelle, Jimmy, and Annabelle's married sister with her 2 little girls, aged 5 and 9. They came by the hotel where Jimmy still boarded, and he ran up to his room and brought along his suitcase. Then they went on to the bank. There stood Jimmy's horse and buggy and Ralph Gibson. There stood Jimmy's horse and buggy and Dolph Gibson, who was going to drive him over to the railroad station. All went inside the high-carved oak railings into the banking room, Jimmy included, for Mr. Adams' future son-in-law was welcome anywhere. The clerks were pleased to be greeted by the good-looking, agreeable young man who was going to marry Miss Annabelle. Jimmy set his suitcase down. Annabelle, whose heart was bubbling with happiness and lively youth, put on Jimmy's hat and picked up the suitcase.
Wouldn't I make a nice drummer?
Said Annabelle.
My, Ralph, how heavy it is. Feels like it was full of gold bricks. Lots of nickel-plated shoehorns in there.
Said Jimmy coolly.
That I'm going to return. Thought I'd save express charges by taking them up. I'm getting awfully economical.
The Elmore Bank had just put in a new safe and vault. Mr. Adams was very proud of it and insisted on an inspection by everyone. The vault was a small one, but it had a new patented door. It fastened with 3 solid steel bolts, thrown simultaneously with a single handle, and had a time lock. Mr. Adams beamingly explained its workings to Mr. Spencer, who showed a courteous but not too intelligent interest. It's a funny word to get tripped on, intelligent. I really want the people to know that I love this story. And my bumbling and fumbling and being a weirdo about reading this has nothing to do with how much I like or dislike the story.
You've always been a big fan of O.Henry.
Always been a big fan. Mr. Adams beamingly explained its workings to Mr. Spencer, who showed a courteous but not too intelligent interest. The 2 children, May and Agatha, were delighted by the shining metal and funny clock and knobs. While they were thus engaged, Ben Price sauntered is a great word.
It is.
While they were thus engaged, Ben Price sauntered in and leaned on his elbow, looking casually inside between the railings. He told the teller that he didn't want anything. He was just waiting for a man he knew. Suddenly there was a scream or two from the women and a commotion. Unperceived by the elders, May and the 9-year-old girl, in a spirit of play, had shut Agatha in the vault. She had then shot the bolts and turned the knob of the combination as she had seen Mr. Adams do. The old banker sprang to the handle and tugged at it for a moment.
"The door can't be opened,"
he groaned.
"The clock hadn't been wound, nor has the combination been set."
Agatha's mother screamed again, hysterically.
"Hush,"
said Mr. Adams, raising his trembled hand.
"All be quiet for a moment. Agatha!"
he called out as loudly as he could.
"Listen to me."
During the following silence, they could just hear the faint sound of the child wildly shrieking in the dark, in a vault, in panic of terror.
"My precious darling,"
wailed the mother.
"She will die of fright. Open the door. Oh, break it open. Can't you do something?" "There isn't a man nearer than Little Rock who can open that door,"
said Mr. Adams in a shaky voice.
"My God! Spencer, what shall we do? That child, she can't stand it in there long. There isn't enough air, and besides she'll go into convulsions from fright."
Agatha's mother, frantic now, beat the door of the vault with her hands. Somebody wildly suggested dynamite.
That's funny.
Let's not blow the little creature bits inside there. Agatha's mother, frantic now, beat the door of the vault with her hands. Somebody wildly suggested dynamite. Annabelle turned to Jimmy, her large eyes full of anguish, but not yet despairing. To a woman, nothing seems quite impossible to the powers of the man she worships.
"Can't you do something, Ralph? Try, won't you?"
He looked at her with a queer, soft smile on his lips and his keen eyes.
"Annabelle,"
he said,
"give me that rose you're wearing, will you?"
Hardly believing that she had heard him aright, she unpinned the bud from the bosom of her dress and placed it in his hand. Jimmy stuffed it into his vest pocket, threw off his coat, and pulled up his shirt sleeves. With that act, Ralph D. Spencer passed away, and Jimmy Valentine took his place.
"Get away from the door, all of you,"
he commanded shortly. He set his suitcase on the table, opened it out flat. From that time on, he seemed to be unconscious of the presence of anyone else. He laid out the shining, queer implements swiftly and orderly, whistling softly to himself, as he always did when at work. In a deep silence and immovable, the others watched him, as if under a spell. In minutes, Jimmy's pet drill was biting its pet. I need a glass of milk. In a minute, Jimmy's pet drill was biting smoothly into the steel door. In 10 minutes, breaking his own burglarious record, he threw back the bolt and opened the door. Agatha, almost collapsed, but safe, was gathered into her mother's arms. Jimmy Valentine put on his coat and walked outside the railings toward the front door. As he went, he thought he heard a faraway voice that he once knew call,
"Ralph!"
But he never hesitated. At the door, a big man stood somewhat in his way.
"Hello, Ben,"
said Jimmy, still with his strange smile.
"Got around at last, have you? Well, let's go. I don't know that it makes much difference now."
And then Ben Price acted rather strangely.
"Guess you're mistaken, Mr. Spencer,"
he said.
"Don't believe I recognize you. Your buggy's waiting for you, ain't it?"
And Ben Price turned and strolled down the street.
That was a good story. The man leaves a life of crime. Well, he's about to get back. He was scouting that bank is what he was doing.
Yes.
And then he meets the lovely Annabelle.
Mm-hmm.
Makes him forget his evil intentions, and he becomes a changed man. Pretty good what the power of love can do. But yes,
what a great story.
So the thing that got him in to prison in the first place saved a little girl's life. The thing that he learned in prison helped start his honest career. It's a cool, There's a lot of stuff that plays back on each other. O.Henry is unbelievable. He's incredible.
I love it. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for letting me humiliate myself in front of
millions of adoring fans.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Where can people find your work?
The best place is Instagram, Facebook, the Tweeter machine on Twitter. All of those are Jesse R. Phillips on all of those.
With any dots or anything?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I forget. It's Jesse, Jesse, spelled like a man, not a woman. Jesse, spelled like a man. .R. Phillips. Everywhere.
If you want to play a cruel prank on Jesse, write him a note, tell him you're thinking about him, and put an I in between that last S.
I don't like I's in my name.
Anyway.
I'm not a girl. I'm not a Nancy.
So anyway, he doesn't brag on himself. He's absolutely incredible artist. And before we go, where do you get your inspiration? What kind of things? I know that's a huge question. What kind of things kind of things inspire you, and how do you get inspired? How do you inspire yourself?
How do I inspire myself? That's a very good question. That's very difficult. Two things that really popped to my head when you asked me that. Music is a very big source of my inspiration. Whenever I'm in an emotional, creative constipation where I can't create worth a hoot, music somehow usually gets the juices flowing. So that's kind of like my go-to real fast. My second thing is surround myself with people who inspire me, like yourself. You inspire me. There's a few others that inspire me. There's a lot of people in this world that do the opposite of inspire me. They make me want to
stay constipated
and not be creative. People that complain, people that want to talk about things that don't matter, people that want to talk about gossip and always talking about other people and bringing them down. That doesn't make me want to create better. I like people that want to talk about cool ideas and things to do in the future and things that let's go create this, let's do that. Even if you don't actually create it, you're talking about things that matter. So,
one piece of music or artist or composer that someone should listen to if they haven't.
Ooh, that is very difficult. You just brought that out of left field. I have so many.
I mean, one.
Composer? Can I just whittle it down to composers?
Throw a composer.
Hans Zimmer, amazing. James Horner, amazing. John Williams, love it. Another thing I do to help inspiration is I play music myself a little bit. I'm not great at it, but I play a little bit of guitar, a little bit of classical guitar. Even though I sound like a bumpkin when it comes to classical arts, I'm still a bumpkin, but I can play him. Andre Segovia is like a huge inspiration to me. He has little sausage fingers like that. They're like huge, round, fat sausage fingers. I don't know how he plays it. I have humongously long sausage fingers.
You got like bratwurst fingers.
I have bratwurst fingers. So when I was younger, when I first started, I was like, I can never play because my hands are so fat. But then I saw him, and he's the greatest in the world, play with his fat little sausage fingers. I can play with fat, big sausage fingers. So,
and he did.
Sorry, that was a rabbit trail. But
that's great.
Anyway. Music, people that inspire me, and of course, God's Word. Reading story of David inspires me greatly because he was a man after God's own heart. He made a lot of mistakes, but the Lord loved him, and he had a heart to please the Lord no matter what. Whenever he had a mistake, he always was very, what's the word I'm looking for? He had a soft heart for the Lord. Contrite heart. He admitted when he messed up very quickly, and he meant it when he said he was sorry. But he was also a mighty warrior who killed giants and lions and bears with his own hands, and he led armies, but also he played the harp and wrote poetry, and was a very emotional man when it came to speaking about things that he loves. So that's who really King David is like my biggest inspiration.
Nice. Good deal. Thank you very much for being on the old podcast.
Thank you for letting me be on the old podcast. I've had a blast. I really did. Hopefully your people don't hate me for being such a bumpkin. Emphasis on the bumpkin when you're talking about me. Culture you, bumpkin me.
If the name didn't tip them off, they shouldn't have been here anyway.